Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, why do we as Christians worry so much about who is in charge on this earth? Why do we find it necessary to make sure the kingdoms of this world are fixed to our liking? Guess what? We already have a new boss, or a boss who has in fact been in charge for thousands of years already, but for some reason we gloss over that very fact. Today, Duncan joins me to talk about his fantastic article, Tyrants Be Gone. Say hello to the new boss.
Right. Would you rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live what he said. I ain't scared, I will take one to the head. Go ahead. So it's safe to say that I'm bad. So it's safe to say that I'm bad. So it's safe to say that I'm
Duncan, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing all right, thanks. Just getting over maybe the big C. But, I've never gone for any of the tests or shots or any of that garbage. So, but by God's kindness, I'm recovering, doing well.
I never really trusted the test because, they were coming out pretty early on. Well, not early on, maybe a little ways down. They're starting to realize that maybe this is not what they thought it was. And a lot of the tests were coming out. It couldn't differentiate between the flu and the COVID. And so it was real. I didn't trust them. But see the point in getting tested if you didn't know if you had because they pretty much said the flu had gone away and it was all COVID. And I'm like,
yeah. And the fact that various fruits and vegetables were testing positive kind of threw me off.
yeah, that's pretty strange. And then they told me that you could catch COVID from your cats. I've got 3 cats, and I was thinking, well, my cats don't go outside, so I'm pretty sure if they catch COVID, I'll be fine.
We only have one in the house, so
yeah. Well, where I live, there's quite a bit of wildlife, and I had to keep them inside. They're not really interested in going outside anyway, so they stay in, and I'm happy about that. That way, I don't have to worry about them running around some rabid dog or rabid wolf or anything out there.
Sounds good.
All right, so you wrote this article from your website, sent it to us, and we published it on thebadroman.com, and it got a lot of great traction. It got a lot of shares from folks who follow the project. People really latched onto it. I shared it in our private discussion group, and people really loved it. I mean, it's a great piece, and I really appreciate you sending it to us. I enjoyed the article myself, and what we do is we try to get folks on who submit articles to us. We get them on and talk about it a little bit further so we can have a conversation about it. And that's helped us keep content going and keeping the project going. So we really appreciate folks sending us stuff to read. And thank you very much for sending that to us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate people reading it. That's what I wrote it with, the hope that people would read and get a new glimpse of what the good news really is.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. And before we get into that article, I want to get some background from you and tell us a little bit, whatever you're comfortable telling us about yourself, so people can be a little more familiar with you and know who they're hearing from on the show today.
Sure. So I grew up in the 1950s and 60s in a very different America, but of course I swallowed all of the stuff I was taught in school, that I lived in a free country, and it was the freest country in the world, and grew up in a household of Republicans. And when JFK was elected, it was pretty much the end of the world at that point for my family and my folks and their peers. So I kind of naturally was in that realm politically. Fast forward quite a ways, strongly supported Ron Paul when he was running for office both times, and had the privilege of meeting the man and shaking his hand. And then now fast forward a little bit further, and nothing against him. I don't quite understand how even a gentleman as astute as he is can still be so politically active. But I learned a lot from a gentleman by the name of Larkin Rose. Well, let me back up just a bit. Back in the early 90s, I came to the realization that, hey, I wasn't really quite as free as I thought I was. I was being extorted for income tax on a regular basis. My discoveries at that time were that in fact it's all a fraudulent system that deceives the average American into believing they owe taxes that they absolutely do not owe. Came across Larkin Rose and followed some of his adventures resisting the taxation beast. Probably learned more from his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, than pretty much any other book I had ever read. He also had a podcast called Outside the Cage, which was also remarkably good. I highly recommend both of those things. In fact, even though Larkin is not a believer, I would be pretty comfortable standing him in pretty much any pulpit in America because he has things to say to God's people, namely, look in the mirror, people. Do you really believe what you say you believe? Do you really believe that you should love your neighbor as yourself? Well, if that's true, why are you oppressing them by delegating oppression to the state to hurt your neighbor?
Speaking of Ron Paul, then I want to talk about Larkin Rose a little bit too, because he's been very helpful for me as well. But you mentioned Ron Paul, how he can still be so engaged with the political realm and stuff. And I that is something that I'm become increasingly more frustrated with when it comes to anarchists these days, because they seem to be going in reverse and going back towards the Libertarian Party and trying to work through the Libertarian Party to achieve more liberty and this and that. And I was like, what do you need? I said, speaking of Ron Paul, and I've said this a number of times now, Ron Paul proved once and for all that you cannot change the mafia from the inside out. If anybody was going to do it, it's going to be Ron Paul, right?
Right.
And he didn't do it. Why are you still bothering with that? We have to move forward. We have to get past that, because that's not working. We've been trying that for 200 something years now in this country.
Absolutely. It's a huge futility. Since being influenced by Larkin Rose and having conversations with him and reading his books and so on, I pretty much confessedly am an anarchist. And I use that label advisedly just to kind of get listeners into the right category. I think that words and language, and by the way, language is a huge issue for me. Language, and especially the language of the Bible and Bible translation. I think that we're in a lot of trouble as the church, and have been there for a long time, because of egregiously bad Bible translations. Our adversary, the devil, has gotten his little claws into the translating committees and has really messed the church up.
I couldn't agree more with that. That's something else that has been so frustrating to me, because when you look at how the Bible is misquoted, mistranslated, and misread, it leads to 60,000 different denominations in America alone. When I see something like that, when I sit down and just think about that for a minute, there's something wrong with that to me. Why are we so confused on what it says as Christians, and that's why I'm taking the step just to get back to the basic teachings of Christ. And I really don't get into a lot of theological debates with folks anymore, because a lot of it goes over my head. So I just keep it very basic. And I've mentioned that quite a bit on this show. And I want to say something about Larkin Rose too. I've interacted with him a little bit on social media, and I think he has even you mentioned he's not a believer, but I think he has a respect for Christian anarchists to an extent.
As far as I can tell, he certainly does. So anarchist literally means no arc, no archist, no ruler. And that's really a bit of a misnomer. So I'm going to refine things a bit and say what I really am. I believe in no human ruler, no mere mortal human ruler. Let's put it that way. I would call myself a thearchist. That is, God is the only legitimate ruler. God, our creator, Jesus Christ himself, who formed Adam out of the dust of the ground. And, from Adam's progeny, we've all come forth. I was just reading in Acts 17 this morning that, God formed us all from one man and dispersed us in nations all around the world. But because we are his creatures, he has the absolute right to rule us and to do what he will with us and to direct us. But the absolutely fabulous, spectacularly good news is that he's a benevolent ruler and that he does care about his creatures and creation. And so he is the one king, the one true ruler that I can absolutely wholeheartedly subscribe to, follow, believe in, admire, and praise and tell the nations about. So I am a thearchist or a Christarchist, if you will.
There you go. I've never really heard it put like that. And I think you mentioned the article a little bit too. That was my first time hearing that phrase before, thearchy. So when I'm speaking with Christians, I try to, depending on the audience or depending on who I'm engaging, I'll use the phrase anarchy because it might trigger a conversation because they really don't understand what it means. They have an understanding what anarchist means when they listen to somebody like Donald Trump or Sean Hannity, right? So that's not anarchy. And that's been one of the bane of my existence, trying to explain what it actually is to some of these folks. But on the other hand, sometimes I use the term voluntarist because it seems to, when you explain it like a voluntary society and how we're supposed to engage each other voluntarily, that makes more sense in a Christian's head, I think, than using the term anarchist. But unless they understand what anarchist actually is, I've talked to Christians who understand what anarchy is. They just haven't quite made it to that. There's a level of fear that they cannot get past for some reason.
Right. Well, of course, the enemy has taken the term and perverted it and, tried to make people think that it's all bomb-throwing radicals that are out to destroy the world, which is words are words. It's like, Lewis Carroll says in the Alice in Wonderland, the words are going to be, we want words to be our servants and not the other way around. But we certainly do have to be aware of what people think of it. And I'm very happy with the term voluntarist as well. And in fact, that's a huge theme of what I've been writing about the church and about the kingdom of God and how significant the voluntary aspect of that is and how radically different the kingdom of God is in that sense from the kingdoms of or what I prefer to call the fiefdoms of Satan. He's a tin pot dictator, and there's a bunch of so-called kings, but none of them really have any authority, no legitimate authority.
Right. And I think if we could go back in time and speak with some of the early church, the folks in the Bible, in the New Testament, and then beyond, even the first 400 years, if you went back and explained the phrase, because they didn't use phrases like anarchist or voluntarist, they just lived it. But if you could go back in time and talk to these folks and explain what anarchist is or a voluntary society would look like, they would understand it because they were already living it. And that's why we had somebody on the show, Jordan from the Reckless Saints of Nowhere. At the time of this recording, it's actually going to be published next week, but they work with a lot of drug addicts and stuff and getting them help. But we got into some Christian anarchist conversation with him. Me and Abby was on the show with me that day, and we talked about it. And I said, when you say Christian anarchist, I said, but I've also just decided to sometimes just call myself a Christian. He goes, well, that should mean the same thing. And he doesn't consider himself an anarchist yet, I don't think, but when you say Christian, you should automatically just think of yourself as an anarchist when it comes to the kingdoms of this world. They should be synonymous. They should be, and so a lot of the times they're not.
Yeah, unfortunately, the church has gotten in bed with the state, and it's really messed things up. Big time. You mentioned the history of things, and I'm a remedial student of history because as I dig into this and try and understand things more, I find myself having to go back and learn more about the history of the church that I've never been a good student of history.
The older I've gotten, the more interested in history I've gotten, and the longer this project has gone, I've become infatuated and fascinated by the early church. And I'm talking, Constantine.
Right.
Because when you just go back and read the stuff that they were talking about, man, it's so true. It should be, this is how the church should be behaving today. And, they had their quarrels. They didn't agree on everything back then, just like Christians today aren't going to agree on everything, and we could go into so many different things that people argue about today. And they had some of the same things, but it was pretty universal among them who their king was.
Yep.
And they followed lockstep with that idea, their nonviolence attitude. There was pretty universal among them, but then there's a lot of things that they fought about too. And I get that, like you talk about somebody like Tertullian. I'd read a lot of Tertullian. I did not know that he believed in eternal conscious torment. When I read that, I was like, oh, well, I don't know, because I used to believe in that. I don't any longer, right? But I didn't know that about him. But when I hear that, it doesn't take away the other things that he's said about the state. He was very vocal. Tertullian was very vocal when it came to the state. And I love reading his stuff when it comes to that.
Yeah, I've appreciated your references to him. I've looked him up on the web and started reading a little bit here and there, but I still have a long ways to go.
What Christians tend to forget, too, that a lot of these folks, not a lot, but some of them were taught directly by the apostles. Like talk about somebody like Polycarp, he was taught directly by the apostle John. So I think it's important that we go back and read the stuff that these guys were writing, because they were a lot closer to the situation than we are. The church today has gone so far the opposite direction of what these guys were doing, these guys and gals were doing, how they were behaving.
Speaking of it, the very word church is pretty much absolutely the worst possible word that could have been used to translate ecclesia. In fact, the Greek word ecclesia, if you read the book of Acts, you'll find that it was in common use at the time. It was just a gathering of people that managed the local city. And so one of my projects for the last couple of years, I'm still working at it, is reading through the New Testament in Greek. And I've been a Greek student for a long time, but I've always been a dabbler as a student, never been a really, really strong student. And lately, in the last few years, I've just made up my mind, by golly, I'm gonna get my head in there and really, read it for the first time in Greek and really try and get a whole picture of the New Testament. So I'm coming away with some major points, and one is that the ecclesia, there's half a dozen good English words that could have been used instead of church. It's an assembly, it's a gathering, it's a congregation. Any of those words could have been used. The church that I attend here in Southern California recently had a name change, and they solicited ideas from the congregation, and my number one choice would have been City Management Group. Because I believe that's what, in fact, the New Testament teaches that the church is to be. It is to be the replacement local group that guides the local population, only according to totally different principles than the fiefdoms of Satan that we've become so used to and inured to.
Yes, I think that's great that you want to study the Greek. I would love to learn that language and be able to read the New Testament from the Greek. Are you familiar with David Bentley Hart?
No, I'm not.
He has a translation from the Greek, a New Testament translation from the Greek. He's done it himself, and even some of his critics, because there's going to be some things they don't agree with him on, said that he did a very good job of his translation. I got this, and it's just the New Testament, and he translated it from the Greek. A lot of people say, well, all the Bibles are translated from the Greek. I said, were they though? I mean, because, when you go back to somebody like, I can't remember his name though, but he didn't understand the Greek. He hated the Greek language. And so he translated the Bible into Latin.
Right.
But so when you got all these different translations, I think it would be so cool to be able to understand the Greek language and go back and read the original Greek text that they were writing in, because I think when you read this New Testament version that Bentley Hart put out, you can see the differences in it. From like if you go to the King James version or the new translation, whatever they call them these days, but there's some they seem like maybe small differences, but they can change it. They change so much the meaning of what it's saying, because like when you go to Romans 13, they talk about submitting to to governing authorities, and you go to Acts 5, but it says normally it would say we're to obey God rather than man. In this translation, and it's just one word, and it caught my eye. It said it's necessary that we obey God rather than man. It doesn't say we are to. It says it is necessary. That one word necessary. I've always used that scripture when people want to come at me with Romans 13. But when I read it with that in that translation, that very, very, very simple word necessary changed even Acts 5 for me. And that's what I love so much about this translation, because it really kind of opens you can see a lot of how a lot of this stuff is being mistranslated and is being preached like this in the churches. And it's just one word, and it changes everything.
Yeah, let me encourage you, Craig, to dive into some Greek if you have any interest at all, and I'd be happy to encourage you along the way and coach you a bit.
I would love that. We're connected on that Signal app on our phone, so we message quite a bit sometimes when we have time, and that would be really cool. If we're fixing to get busy at work, that would be really cool if we could kind of do that together, and you could kind of teach me some things along the way, because I'm not a smart person. So you might get frustrated with me along the way as well.
Neither am I. And it's actually one of the things that encourages me is 1 Corinthians 1, where Paul says, look around you, brothers, not too many bright luminaries, and so I go, whoa, Lord, maybe there's hope for me to do a positive, because I identify with that.
Me too, so much, on so many different levels, actually.
And as far as Greek goes, I one of my series of articles I call it the Curmudgeon's Bible, in which I bitterly complain about translator issues and errors. So you might find some of those articles interesting.
When we get done here, why don't you send me that? I'd like to read that, because I would probably find that pretty amusing, actually, because I would probably agree with it as well. So you said you grew up in the 50s and 60s, and when JFK was elected, it ruined everybody's, because the household full of Republicans. I grew up in a house full of Republicans as well in West Texas. So I understand that part, but I was born in the 70s. Now, what changed your mind to get you into this idea of Christian anarchy?
Oh, boy.
Other than Larkin Rose and Ron Paul, but was there some single thing that's like made you started wanting to kind of listen to these folks, and you're like, wait, something's wrong here. We've been doing this wrong this whole time.
Well, probably the strongest thing was discovering in the early 90s that the state had been lying to everybody and imposing an income tax on them that was completely contrary to law. And this is when I still believed in law from the state aspect. And, we could get into discussions of what is law. One of the things that I've discovered, kind of shocking, but not too surprising, and that is, by the way, have you ever read The Law by Frederick Bastiat?
Yes, and I recommend that to anybody. It's very thin, it's very short reading. That's actually something I read very early on whenever I was starting my transition, and I don't ever mention. I don't know why I don't mention. I gave that book to a friend of mine for him to read because it's so short. I said, but I want it back, and I still don't have that book back, and now it's back in Arkansas, so I don't have my hands on it.
It's readily available online. Just search for The Law by Bastiat, and you can find any number of. It's translated from French into English. It's an excellent piece, and that got me thinking about the law and recognizing, whoa, we've been basically taught to respect the law, but the law, really the only law that we should be respecting is God's law. And in fact, I did a research through the scriptures and discovered that of more than 400 instances of the word law, statute, commandments, words that are all law or it's cognate, of those 400, maybe, if you're being generous, maybe a dozen of them have any reference at all to human-made laws. And in virtually all of those cases, it's spoken of pejoratively spoken of with disdain, because the only law that matters is God's law. And in fact, one of the articles I've written you might enjoy reading has to do with Romans 13 and the fact that what is being referred to there in Romans 13:1 is in fact God and his law, and not human government at all.
Yes, if you have not read the law, go read this, because and like I said, it was something I read very early on when I was coming out of my Republican days, and it was after Donald Trump was nominated and all this stuff. And I don't remember who recommended it to me, but I picked it up. I read it a couple of times actually, because and that really kind of started me down a rabbit hole of unlearning things that I've been taught my entire life. And that's probably a great place to start, is that book, The Law. And then you can go from there and get into, like you mentioned, Larkin Rose, the most dangerous superstition. That's another great book too. And it really, when you start reading this stuff, you start thinking, man, what were these people teaching me? Because what they're saying is not anything that can be disputed.
Right.
If you look at it honestly, everything that they were saying in these books, you can't dispute it, because we see it happening right before our eyes on a daily basis. And then we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, how my frustration with Christians and how they're still involved with the state and still trying to fix things through the state because they're afraid of the other team. But they're seeing this stuff. If the last 2 years did not wake people up to what's been going on with the government, I don't know if anything will. And so I don't know what has to happen. What has to happen for people to kind of wake up and realize this is not right, especially Christians, man. Come on. Where are we at as Christians?
Part of, I think, of what has to happen is we need to knock off the pedestal some misapprehensions. The church, I see the church, the ecclesia, as having gone seriously wrong at a couple of major points in history. One, of course, was Constantine, where essentially the Roman emperor, as I understand it, pretty much co-opted the church so as to avoid having it essentially replace it. I believe God intends for the church to totally replace and obviate the kingdoms, the fiefdoms of Satan. But Constantine and our adversary, the devil, got clever and he brought the church under his wing. But then another place where things went seriously wrong, it falls under the category of replacing the commandments of God with the traditions of men. And that was during the Reformation. Now, I'm not saying the Reformation was bad or unnecessary. I think it was crucial, and it was a good thing. However, it didn't quite go far enough, and it suffers from a severe miscategorization of things. Namely, it's this, and that is the reformers divided the world into ecclesiastical governance and civil governance, when the true distinction is kingdom of God, kingdom of Jesus versus kingdoms or fiefdoms of Satan. And so the reformers view this sphere, they call it a sphere of civil government, as something legitimate. They see it as something good, something that they want to get their finger into and participate in and change from the inside out. When the reality is that throughout Scripture, the Scriptures universally teach that those organizations, those structures are Satan's governance system, and they're based on evil principles, and they're directly influenced by demons. And, we should be coming out from them and being separate.
Right. And that's another frustration of Craig's is when Jesus was tempted with that power, he refused it.
Yep.
He did not dispute what Satan was saying when Satan said, I've been given the authority over the kingdoms of this world, and I can give you that power if you just bow down to me. He didn't dispute what Satan said. He just said, no, I'm good. I've got my own kingdom. And if we're followers of Christ, why would we not want to follow in that same his same footsteps like the early church did, the early Christians? And it got muddied up with Constantine, and it just gotten worse and worse over the years. And I think we're seeing right before our eyes the crumbling of the United States empire, because I don't think that they can sustain themselves at this point. And the church needs to be ready for it. Christians need to be ready for that, because it's going to be a little chaotic at first. People are going to be freaked out, I think, if it does happen in our lifetime, or when it does happen, it's going to be chaotic. But Christians need to be able to take the lead there and like, listen, we've been telling you this whole time, there's a better way. And his name is Jesus. He's got our best interest in mind, and we can follow along what he taught us, and things will be fine. That's where, and I mentioned this before, I think in our discussion group, where there was a guy who had a question about Christian anarchism, and he's not really on board with the anarchy side of it because he has questions. He's still trying to work through it. I said, we're secular anarchists. They have an idea of what a voluntary society is, but Christian anarchists, Christians have already answered these questions that you have. What would that society look like without a civil government, like you were just talking about? And I was pretty ignorant to the Reformation when I first started running around in these circles. I was ignorant to Calvinism. I was ignorant to the Reformation, and I didn't even know it existed until I started getting in these circles. And there's a lot of these folks that run around in these same circles too. And I agree with what you said. They do still think that they can get their fingers in there and fix it. I see a lot of these people going back and trying to work through like the Mises Caucus and the Libertarian Party and all this stuff because they think that's how we're going to get things fixed. And I'm like, y'all have a ball. I don't really I'll still argue with them some about it. Not like I used to. I used to get into some pretty heated debates with them about it. And now I'm like, go waste your time. I'm not going to waste my time on it. It's too exhausting. But if you want to go waste your time and wear yourself out doing that, have a ball. I'm moving forward. I'm moving forward without that garbage.
Yeah, well, I think what the church needs to realize is that we are, in fact, God's new governance structure. And what I'm coming to see as I read the New Testament in Greek and read it with a different pair of glasses on, so to speak, is that it is a handbook for governance. It's a handbook for how we're to govern society, and it is to be completely voluntary. And the only power that the only authority God grants the church for enforcement, shall we say, is ultimately, he says that if we have a problem with our brother, we go to him directly. And if we can't resolve it, then we bring a couple of fellows with us and, make sure that all the facts are established. And if that doesn't resolve it, then we take it to the whole ecclesia, to the assembly, our local group. And if that doesn't resolve it, then ultimately the only enforcement, quote and unquote, authority that the church has is to eject that person. Paul says, give them into the hands of Satan. There's a pretty good indicator that the fiefdoms out there are, still in Satan's hands. We just eject them from the church and let the world take care of them. But my growing vision for what this should be is that, okay, let me back up a little bit. I kind of despaired. You look at the history of the world and of America, let's say, and a lot of persecuted people left the continent and came over to America looking for liberty. And as I've become more and more aware of how little liberty there is in the world, I've kind of despaired because there's really no place left to go. And then I was somewhat encouraged to come across the concept of seasteading. I don't know if you've come across that at all. But the idea is that, people that are looking for a different governance structure or more liberty could build seasteads, that is, floating communities out in the ocean, out of the jurisdiction of these fiefdoms of Satan. And this is not necessarily religiously motivated, but just, motivated by the desire every human being, every real human being has to be free and not to be oppressed and ruled by some tin pot dictator. So, I looked at those with some interest, and then it came to me, hey, this is exactly what the church is supposed to be. We're supposed to be forming our own little, not seasteads, but we need to deny this evil concept of territorial jurisdiction. And we need to be what God says we are, which is a holy nation. The Apostle Peter wrote to us and said that we're a peculiar people. We're special, but we're not organized along geographic or ethnic lines. We come from every tribe and nation and tongue and kindred on the face of the earth. And the thing we have in common is our Lord and King, Jesus, and our acknowledgement that he's the one that rules us. And so another big piece of the message I have is that a major portion of the good news has been abandoned by the church, and that is the good news of the kingdom. That's what John the Baptist came preaching. That's what Jesus followed up and went around the world preaching. And that's what the apostles really were preaching. There's really good news. There's a new boss in town. We don't have to kiss the feet of these other ignorant, tyrannical monstrosities. We can just follow Jesus. And so we need to take that authority and that power as God's people and just deny the rule of the tyrants around us.
Hey folks, Craig here, and I'd like to let y'all know we are always looking for writers to contribute to our blog. I don't care if you have any experience or not. 2 or 3 of our contributors had no prior experience writing, and it turns out they have a real knack for it. Our project coordinator helps them put the articles together, and she publishes them on our website and Facebook page, and you will also have the option to come on the show and go more in depth about your article. So if you like what we're doing at The Bad Roman and would like to try your hand at writing, then send us an email at thebadromanpodcast@gmail.com. We're having a blast with this project, and we would love for you to join us in helping promote it. Now back to the show. Well, that was a great segue into your article. We spent about 40 minutes here going over a lot of things. And I'm enjoying this conversation so much I could keep talking to you about it, but I don't want to leave out your article either, because that was kind of what brought us together. But you kind of segued into it, and that was perfect. And the title of this article again is "Tyrants Be Gone, Say Hello to the New Boss." And if you've not read it, go to thebadroman.com and pull it up. It's a great piece. And I just kind of want to start at the very beginning. I think we've touched on it a little bit, but he said the church is misunderstood. Like many traditional religious concepts these days, our ideas about what the church is are very far away from what the church was actually meant to be. And we've already talked about that quite a bit already, I think. And he says, good news, tyrants are so over. That's right. There's a new boss in town. And I love this part. I'm at the very beginning of the article, but I love this. He said, actually, he's been in charge for thousands of years already. But unfortunately, his press agents got sidetracked and dropped the ball. They've done a marginal job of informing the public of the change at City Hall. And I love that little paragraph right there. When I read that, I laughed because it was so true, because we've done what you said, a marginal job of letting people know who the boss is, who Jesus is, and who is the king. And, there's so much in just that one little paragraph. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, actually, we've done a worse than marginal job. We have totally misdirected everyone sitting in a pew to worship the state. And it's largely been a result of bad translations. And the great granddaddy of them all is Romans 13. So, if you look at Romans 13:1, let me paraphrase that 2 ways. I'm going to paraphrase it first the way that I think that the church has mistaught it and has used it as a bludgeon on the head of every believer. Basically, it says, hey, you pew sitters, you better kiss the feet of government because God put them there. You better do whatever they tell you to do. Because if you resist what they say, man, you're just resisting God. So that's my egregiously bad paraphrase of 13:1. But now let me read it the way I believe it actually should be read. Let every soul, I don't care if you are a gutter sweep or the freaking president of the United States, you need to be subject to the highest authorities, namely God and his word. For there is no other source of authority. God is the source of authority, and if you resist his authority, you are of none authority.
I love it, because you're right. That is the granddaddy of them all, the Romans 13. And I was discussing this a little bit with a guy at work, a coworker, and we got into voting and politics, and he's still of the mind that we've got to get more Christians in office to make things better, and it's all this garbage. And then he I think it's First Peter or Second Peter, he brought up or no, that's not where it was. He said somewhere in the Bible, so the government will be up on his shoulders. So he takes that in his head to say that the United States government, will be up on the shoulders of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
is what he's taking that to mean. And so I hit him with, I was like, so are you saying the same thing about Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Russia, China, all these countries that you disagree with? Are you saying the same thing about that? I said, you can't just think that this is about the United States of America. And I think that's a big problem in Christianity in America, is they have this idea that we're the good guys, and that couldn't be further from the truth. The United States government has probably killed a Holocaust worth of people. That is not what Jesus told us to do.
Absolutely. Well, the news is that there are no good guys among the fiefdoms of Satan. Yeah, I'm sure there's any number of deluded, well-meaning people that have been swept up into it. But what they're not really recognizing and realizing is that they are participating in Satan's efforts to destroy the world. And they're doing a darn good job of it the last couple of years, actually. And the sooner the church wakes up and realizes that universally throughout Scripture, the Scriptures teach that Jesus is in fact in the process of bringing those fiefdoms to nothing, of destroying them, of bringing them down. And here we are, trying to shore them up. It makes no sense at all, and it drives me crazy.
It has to be. This is where I'm at with it. It has to be on some level of fear in these people's minds. When Jesus brought us out of that, he said, "What are you worried about? What are you worried about?" But there's this mindset that, well, if we get the right amount of Christians in office, things would get better. A lot of the founders of this country called themselves Christians, and now we've got Joe Biden as president. He calls himself a Christian. He attends church on a regular basis. Why do you think that you can fix this by putting more Christians in office? We've done it. Now, are they really Christians? Probably not. Okay, but it looks good for him to say it. George W. Bush called himself a Christian. It was God that was leading him to run for president of the United States. His mom told him that. But what happened 9 months later after he took office? We've been at war for over 20 years now. That's not Christ-like. There's nothing Christ-like about that.
So, the other things that really drive me crazy is that Paul tells us that we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God did beseech you by us, be reconciled to God. What ambassador, even in the human sense, participates in the government where they're an ambassador?
Yeah.
No, they're there just to represent their own government. We need to represent the kingdom of God, not participate in the fiefdoms of Satan.
Well, and you mentioned this, and there's this portion of your article says, but you've heard it all before, right? If you're a Christian, probably, even if you're not, you've likely heard some form of this message, perhaps tagged as the gospel, i.e. the good news. That message is correct as far as it goes. Unfortunately, it doesn't go far enough. There's more to that message, more strikingly good news that seems to have fallen by the wayside. There's an important component of this good news about Jesus that hasn't been reported either sufficiently or accurately. The missing part is the good news of the kingdom of God. when we hear the gospel, when people, the vast majority of Christians, when they think gospel or they think the good news, they're thinking about being saved from hell.
Right.
Okay. They don't think of the good news of the kingdom of God. You know, it's the same thing when Jesus was resurrected. He sent women to go tell the men who were hiding about the good news. What was that good news? And you just said it right here, the kingdom of God. And Jesus said the kingdom of God is at hand. It's here.
Exactly, here. And the thing is that the church has pushed that off to some distant point in the future rather than allowing it to be here.
Yeah.
Back in the book of Luke, we see Mary rejoicing over the advent of the kingdom. And then we see Zechariah also talking about the fact that, hey, here is the one who's going to deliver us from our enemies. Now, who are the enemies? It was the Rome. It was Rome that that they needed deliverance from. And
yeah,
because of our being born into America or wherever we happen to live, we have this illusion that, oh, we're Americans and we America is good, and when the more you open your eyes, the more you refuse to comply with whatever the current regime is, the more you realize, hey, this outfit is not my friend. This is not my savior. This is my destroyer. I need to be delivered from this monstrosity.
Yes. And this portion of the article, aren't you sick and tired of tyrants? I think that's a great question. And I think it's a question we should be asking every Christian involved with the state, trying to get back into the state, trying to work through the state to fix things. This should be a question that we ask them, because even your favorite person that you're running and voting for is a tyrant. Aren't you sick of it? What's that thing that Einstein said? He said what is insanity? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results.
Yeah.
And you briefly mentioned the COVID debacle in this article as well, in this portion. The idea that you're going to change things through the state and not recognizing what's happened the last 2 years, it's got to be something blinded. Something is blinding them from opening up to this. And I go back to this all the time. I think it's the fear. There's a fear aspect to this. They're terrified of too many Democrats in office or too many Republicans in office, and then libertarians are afraid of Republicans and Democrats. So they're going to put as many libertarians in office as they can, it's because they're afraid of the other team. But at the same time, you're still putting somebody in power over your neighbor. You're putting somebody in power over your brothers, your sisters. That's not what Jesus told us to do. And Paul had said that, it was Jesus said this, that you see how the Gentiles lord over them. It will not be the same among you.
One of Satan's biggest ploys is dividing and conquering. Basically he splits people up into two camps and gets them battling each other instead of battling the issues or battling him.
You said at the last portion of that section of the article, he says the only power they have at all is the utterly unjust, raw power to rob, hurt, and enslave you. Everything you may have been told suggesting that either God has or the people have authorized this state to do that dirty work is a lie from the deepest, darkest pit of hell. And you mentioned earlier that these kingdoms of this world are backed by demons. The demons are working through this. It's those are the ones that are behind this. Why are you trying to fix that? Why are you being involved with it? We got to walk away. We got to go back to the teachings of Christ. We got to follow Jesus.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
So you mentioned Romans 13. You kind of paraphrased how you see Romans 13. In light of Romans 13, how do you read Acts 5? Because this is, we were talking about the Greek earlier, and I've had some folks disagree with me about this, and honest, and to be transparent about this, the one who's disagreed with me about this translation is a Calvinist, and he's still trying to work through the civil government that you were talking about earlier. But in Romans 13, it talks about submission, and in Acts 5, it talks about obedience. And I looked up the two words in the Greek, like I'm no Greek scholar, and the way I read these definitions of these two words, there's two different definitions of submission and obedience. Do you see it the same way since you've been kind of studying this, or am I missing something here?
No, absolutely right. There's a lot of poorly understood words. So, the whole idea of rulers, actually, the Greek is more the idea of people that are first or primary, the archon idea. It's more a concept of leadership that we voluntarily follow rather than dictatorship where rules are laid down hard and fast and must be followed. The only real legitimate rules are literally the law of God. And beyond that, for us believers, God writes those laws in our hearts. So we don't need to even, we certainly respect the scriptures and, use them as a guideline, but we don't need to slavishly be carrying around the book and, checking every move that we make, as long as we are following Jesus' law of love. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. And by this will all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. So I believe our calling as the church, as the assembly, is to step out of the world, to govern ourselves, to voluntarily submit to church leaders who are really the true model of servant leadership that the New Testament speaks of.
This next portion of the article, here's the crux of the matter. At the very end of this portion, you said, we are not to support the substantively participate in the failed kingdoms of this world, which are based upon satanic principles. I don't think we can say that enough. And I think we need to say that as loud as we can and keep beating that drum about how it is these kingdoms, even the United States of America, is based off of the satanic principles. We have to recognize it very quickly as Christians. Otherwise, it's just you're going to keep going down this path that only leads to destruction. And he said, instead, we are to be and become a decentralized, distributed replacement governance system that acknowledges only the sovereign authority of King Jesus, denying the allegiance to any other jurisdiction, territorial or otherwise. I love that. I love that. It sounds, you and I, when we can sit here and talk about this, and we can agree on this, and it sounds so simple in our mind. But when you're talking to somebody that has not kind of reached the level we're at in our understanding of where we're supposed to be, it's not sinking in, and that's what I'm wanting to try to penetrate with folks, is try to understand, why is this sinking in? You read these same scripture, you read the same Bible that I'm reading. What is it that's not sinking in? Where's that block coming from? And that's really something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is how do we get past that? What has to happen for you to see that the state is evil and you're a Christian and we're supposed to abstain from evil? We're not supposed to be a part of it.
Yeah, one thing, a tool that I think might be helpful, one of the articles I wrote, I have kind of an A-B comparison chart that compares and contrasts the principles the state runs on versus the principles I believe the ecclesia should be running on. And so that might be a useful tool. I think that the core concept of the libertarian philosophy is pretty much spot on, which is not to initiate violence. And that's what the state does all the time. Violence in defense, well, I struggle with it a bit, but, I think at least that has legitimate value, and that we're taught to, by scripture, to provide for and care for our own households. But the core concept of libertarianism, not to initiate violence, but even more, go back to, for a minute, this idea of no human being or group of human beings having legitimate right to rule over other humans. This was essentially the original sin that Satan committed. Satan said in his heart, I'm going to ascend and be like God. And what is the core of that is I'm going to rule over other people. God gave us the right and the authority to rule over creation, to rule over the animal kingdom, but never, ever to rule over one another. The only one who has that right is God himself, Jesus, our creator.
That's right. That is right.
Maybe the core thing to get across to people about the state is that the state is committing the same crime as Satan. They are assuming godness by asserting that they have a right